Hola, and welcome to this episode of the Everyday Jefa. I am your host, Bessie Martinez, and I am so grateful that you are here with us today because you are in for a treat. In March, for the last 3 years, during a event that is hosted here in the Austin area called South by Southwest, we have been hosting our own unofficial event called House of Chingonas. And so today, we are going to be bringing you one of those panel sessions for you to be able to watch or listen, depending on where you prefer, to be able to catch your content. And you'll be able to see exactly what kind of conversations Latinas are having during South by Southwest. If you've never come to South by Southwest, it is an amazing event to attend to. However, there is still room for growth when it comes to the Latino representation during festivals like this. That is why my foundation, the Latina Foundation, is so excited every year to be able to host this as many of other events throughout the entire year, but this one particularly because it brings people from all walks of life, from all parts of this country to sit down, have a conversation. So this year it was Nuestra Casa es tu Casa. And so we're so excited to be able to bring you this episode with this particular topic. So go ahead, sit down, grab your cafecito, grab your té, grab your comadres, and listen into the conversations that Latinas are having today. We hope you enjoy it.
I am a Tejas girl. I'm a Chicana from San Antonio, Texas. Yes. And we are single mom capital of the world. Proudly and not proudly. I am a single mom. I got a 12-year-old daughter. And I started my 16. Oh, girl, pray for us. Single mom. Okay, so you feel my pain. I started my entrepreneur journey 15 years ago, and I started a marketing company called Heartfire Media, and it was social media strategy, video production, and that's the world that I lived in. And I started my own podcast 8 years ago called Bean and Chisme. And Bean and Chisme is a platform now dedicated to comedy, community, and culture. And so I produce a lot of content based on my experience as a Latina Chicana from San Antonio, Texas. And I have Tío character, I got an Abuela character, I talk about being a prima and what it's like growing up with many hardships, but lots of love. And so I have had to, on my own entrepreneurial journey, figure out how I fit into this economic puzzle. But I also understand how powerful that is to have an audience of also educated Latina women who have so much to say, and we work so hard to build empires. And so that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to connect with you guys. I'm here to learn from these other chingonas that are here. So here we go. And I also wanted to give a shout out to today's sponsor, which is Amy Cobbs. Thank you so much for sponsoring this very important panel. I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you the panelists. Let me change this real quick. Here we go. Please come up to the stage, Miss Leticia de la Varra. Please give her a round of applause. Alicia Gutierrez. And Doctora Veronica Benavides. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question. For all three of you. Okay, culture is often treated as identity, but for Latinas, it's also strategy, resilience, and economic power. How has culture shaped the way you lead, create, and build community?
You hear me now? Leticia Lavara. I serve as Chief of Policy and External Affairs for TNTP, which is one of the largest national education nonprofits in the country, and have been there for about 10 years. So I guess for me, the way culture shapes the way I lead. But let me just start here. Like I am also a single mother of a 23-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah, and was a dropout, and didn't get my degree until I was 33. So for me, culture wasn't something that I discovered, early on in terms of like how do I bring it to work. It was something that was just part of who I was. It was actually the foundation of how I understood what leadership looked like, because I think I understood leadership before I understood, corporate. I grew up with parents who are part of the Chicano movement. They showed me through, community meetings and the ways that they would engage about stuff outside of the day-to-day work, how to strengthen community. So I grew up just knowing culture is how you lead. what I realized going into a career was, how do I translate what makes me feel good about the people I've been exposed to, the Chicanos in my community who showed me what it looks like to serve, and actually take the facade off of you're not ready, you haven't done this, you did things late, and really just lean into, this is how I've grown up, this is how I lead, this is who I am. And servant leadership is something that Latinos and Latinas carry with them. And that actually serves you because you know how to listen, right? You know how to engage and really think about what is the issue at hand before you get to solutions. Many of our white counterparts want to go straight to, I'm in here, I'm an expert. I come in with the lens of like, I'm here to figure out what's going on. Who else are experts here that I could learn from? And where does my unique value add strengthen what we're working towards? So that's how I bring in culture to the way that I lead.
Hi, everybody. Okay, this thing is on. My name's Alicia. I would always describe like what I do is I'm in the business of community and working with creatives. I actually went to art school, which was really upsetting for my parents who immigrated to give me an education because they didn't really see what that pathway would lead to. And so I think that as I was trying to navigate being in a private art school, trying to figure out what was actually going to be my career, I really realized that my passion was creativity in the arts, and naturally that just leads to culture. And my interest in culture then really became based off my own lived experience, which was, you know, my first generation like point of view and being informed by so many ideas of my Mexican identity. And so as I navigated art school and really thinking about what does a creative career translate to, I realized that I had to go and bet on myself and like my own lived experiences because that's all I kind of knew and had. Now, at the time in the creative industry, people weren't talking about Latinos as the movers and shakers of culture. But when you look at subculture and the foundation and the history, Latinos have always been the foundation, especially in this country when you really look at it. But obviously now as we think about it, like on a global stage, you look at music, you look at art, you look at gastronomy, and everyone's talking about Latin culture, not just in Latin America, but also in the US. And so as I started thinking about this and really thinking about what my career would lead to, I remember reading an article in Ad Age that said that brands that don't listen to Latinos will inevitably die. And that was like the headline of there was a hot take at the time. It was like, this is scandalous, you know? But what it started to really click for me was that if I looked at how to invest and how to support and how to be essentially like a patron of Latin creatives, that eventually the trend in America would translate into like the demographics and the representation in this country. And so for me, culture ultimately is about really leaning in on like your own lived experience and really seeing how that translates into your career and also to your passions. So naturally from that, you know, when you look at like music culture or you look at gastronomy or even look at art, culture to me is something that is based off what I know and what I've always known, but I think it's just more globally recognized.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vero, and I am the founder and CEO of Bilingual Generation. We help kids with bilingualism in their bones stay connected to their heritage languages and cultures, and now fully understand the power of culture as a strength, but that wasn't where I started. I love what you said, Leticia, that, you know, you had this model of culture as leadership. My parents had a very different experience growing up in South Texas. They were the first in their generation to go to any type of schooling in Mexico or in the US in our family. And when they arrived at school speaking Spanish, they were physically punished for speaking that language. So they pretty quickly internalized that their language, their culture didn't belong in an academic setting. And even though it was their first language, the language of their family and their community, when they had kids, they did what all parents want, which is the best for their kids, and thought that it would be best for us to be raised in an English only setting. They would speak Spanish, but only when they didn't want us to understand what they were saying. And I grew up what I would say, used to say passively bilingual. Now I say receptively bilingual, but I couldn't really talk to my grandmother until I was in my 20s and learned the Spanish language, and didn't really understand what a loss this was, the loss of my language, until I went to college. I went to undergrad at UT Austin and really struggled that first year, almost dropped out. It was a big difference between my high school to the college setting. And it wasn't until I found my community the Mexican American Culture Committee, ethnic studies, Mexican American studies, that I started to shift my perspective, that I started to understand that my culture, my strength wasn't something to hide, but something that would help me get ahead. And so I really, at that point, through the process of going through college, understood that culture, and now doing my doctoral studies, culture is what sustains students. It helps them have better academic outcomes. I understood that firsthand as a student, a university student, being connected to my culture and eventually graduating with honors. And then as a teacher, seeing that when we embed culture into the classroom, our students do better academically. So that really guides what we do at Bilingual Generation and what I've done my whole career.
Awesome. And so Bilingual Generation is an app?
Bilingual Generation is an organization. We do teacher capacity building, family capacity building, and we also have an app. We say that it's Abuelita and Science approved. It is an app that is teaching children pre-K to second grade their language. And it's designed specifically for Latino children. So we have English and Spanish, but we're also expanding to indigenous languages like Aymara and Quechua, because Latinidad is not just Spanish. We have many, many different identities. And us, folks in this room can try the app for free, download it, and see all of the beautiful community author stories that we have there, community cards to promote intergenerational communication and the different ways that we support that.
Many of you have built influence outside of traditional systems. What was the moment you realized your cultural lens wasn't a barrier, it was your advantage?
Well, I think when I think about building community, oftentimes you think about like your own peers and the community you're building, but when you're working at a brand, it's a word that's been like overly used to death in marketing. And so when they're like, we're launching this product or we're launching this thing in this new place, go build community, it really can feel inauthentic if you're not like putting the energy and the care and the intention behind genuinely connecting with people. And people are very smart consumers that can really like see past that. And so what I was responsible for was helping launch a brand called Soho House, which is a private members club for creative people. It's a British brand. And so I had a bunch of British people telling me to go figure out Latin America. And I think at the time I was the only director that was Latina. So for me, I was like, absolutely, I've been waiting for this project for years. But they were like, go build community. It's like, well, wait a minute, it's not so easy. You actually need to go sit down and connect with people and really understand how you're going to create a hotel and a restaurant and a private members club in a place that traditionally doesn't have that culture, but also in a place that has a lot of systematic oppression and racial, inequalities economically. And so one of the things that I think about often is this idea of sobremesa, which it's like a hard word to translate, but it's literally the act of eating food and sharing a meal and conversation like over a table. So when I think about community, I often think about how do you build your own sobremesa where you can connect and break bread with people and authentically, really speak to them. And I think that this is something that's kind of stuck with me because I think it's a common value in Latin America, but I think in the US, when you think about like US Latinos and the way that we like to gather and connect and share ideas, it's something that I think has really helped me think about the idea of community and make it authentic to myself.
I appreciate the question because it gave me actually two. One was personal, and then one is like what we're all here for, right? Like, how do you actually activate it? From a personal lens, when I entered into more policy work, I was coming in without a college degree, as a single parent, living in poverty. And those are all like the data statistics that people put out, like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. These people need to overcome so much. And I was actually saying, wait, these people, that's me. Like, I actually can understand when we do policy, what that means when you're sitting at the kitchen table, what that means for the people you care about, what that means for the people you're raising, and what that means for you as a person. So your policy, and we do a lot of work in policy around the country at the state and federal level, like your policy doesn't matter. The paper and the words are just that, right? And what matters is how is that person who is also a single parent, who is also potentially working an hourly job and trying to figure out how to make rent and buy food. How is this policy actually going to change not just them, but the generation that comes behind them, the generation that they're raising up? And to be able to have that conversation and realize I'm actually, these things that you count as deficits are actually what give me the power to have a more compelling conversation with you about what's going to be sustainable. So that was one, like the person, me saying like, shit, excuse me, I belong at this.
No
I belong
apologizing
at
in this
table,
room.
and they're lucky to have me because I can tell them what's going to be real about what's happening. But the second one, and I'm at TNTP, like I mentioned before, one of the largest national education nonprofits in the country. When I joined 10 years ago, I came in and I was looking around for who else looked like me. Like, we're a national company, who else can I reach out to? And I quickly realized, including me, there were 8 of us. And at that time, there were about 300 folks on staff. Like 8 people working in education that identify as Latino. And I was like, wow, there's not a lot of us. And I remember the folks who had hired me saying, yeah, and we're so lucky to have you. Thank you for coming. I remember like, you could take that moment and be like, yeah, I'm grateful to be here. I actually said, yeah, that's a real problem. Like, you guys need to fix this because we are the fastest growing population in the country. We will be the next teachers. We will be the next principals, the next educators. And if you don't know how to tap into us now, what right do you have to go into a classroom and say, this is how you should be teaching students? Like, you need to fix this. This is actually an economic problem for you. You're lucky I'm here to say it to you. Now, how will we fix it? Because you will die, right? If you don't adapt to the changing demographics, both of the student and of the employee population, you need to fix this now, and really shifting that so they don't see like we're so patting themselves on the back for hiring a Latina to, we need to fix this. Like, how are we going to stay competitive as a national organization if we don't look at who the employee pool is and figure out how to reach them? And that's what I told them, like, you should be a third Latino in this organization to really stay competitive and to bring forth the right type of strengths and characteristics you need to be in the education space. And the fact that you're not even seeing that, like, you can be kissing this organization goodbye. So what are we going to do to fix it?
Yeah. Very powerful.
I love that. You're lucky that I'm here to tell you this. That's beautiful. And
Uh-huh.
have me here.
You're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, that also makes me think about my first year of teaching. I grew up in Houston, went to undergrad at UT Austin, and then taught in New York City. And at the high school that I taught at, there were many, many lessons. I was the only Latina in that school, even though it was probably like 70% Latino, and a more diverse Latino student population than I had ever seen in New York City. Lots of different country of origins for the students there. And the fact that I was the only Latina was kind of shocking. And I had heard a few weeks in that the Spanish teacher, who was a white woman, was assigning kind of countries of studies to children. And the children complained when they were assigned Mexico because they didn't want Mexico. So her solution was just to remove Mexico from the country of study program, just erase it. And then but like 2 days later, I was in a class, last period, kids are rowdy. There's like a little kind of fight, scuffle breaking out in the corner. And I'm like, what's going on? What's wrong? And the child responds, he called me Mexican, miss. I'm not Mexican. And I was like, well, you shouldn't call somebody something that they're not. But also, what's wrong with being called Mexican? And he said, Mexicans are dirty and ugly. Like, I'm clearly not Mexican. And I was like, okay. And if I had not had my identity, who I was, a grounding in that, I could have been like that Spanish teacher that just erased the conversation, that just moved on, that just said, get out, go to detention. But rather in that moment, I opened up the conversation about stereotypes, about me being Mexican, if they feel that way about me, about the other students in the room that I could feel sink in their seat because they were Mexican as well. And so it made me realize, like, very early on, these children, even though high school students, they're children. They're absorbing and reflecting what they hear in the society around them. And it's our responsibility in our schools, in our curriculum, and just in our presence to challenge those stereotypes. And that was, I don't know, 20 years ago when that happened. And we may think that that was a long time ago, but it's consistent, y'all, and it's cyclical, because that's the same kind of messaging that my parents received. That's the same kind of messaging that we heard when the first run of our current president came down the escalator and said that Mexicans were rapists and bad people. And it's the same kind of messaging when my son, who was reading a Danish book not too long ago, said, we're going to Mexico this summer. He said, oh, but it's dangerous there. And I was like, who told you it's dangerous? He's like, oh, it's in my Danish almanac here. Like, read this. And I took out my little translator and I was like, también en Dinamarca están diciendo eso. And so we have a lot of work to do. We're working up against a lot. And so sometimes when we feel a sense of not enoughness, it's not a personal fault. It's a societal message that is constantly there, and that we have to show up. We have to be in the room to push back against that in every moment and in every way.
I share the same sentiment with you guys when I've had like an aha moment in my career too, where I'm like, wait a minute, I'm very powerful here, and you guys are not letting me be aware of that power on purpose. Like they kind of want you to feel inferior. And I just wanted to share really briefly in my journey and my experience with building Bean and Cheeseman brand and going after sponsors and asking for partners to help fund some of the content that I have. I would get approached shockingly by like a bank. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I got into Frost Bank. Like I have a meeting with Frost Bank. And at first it was really exciting and fun, but then I realized they were using me to check a box because they were like, hey, we need Latinos that are median to low income to start applying for car loans. And I was like, hold on. But then also my aha, I was like, oh shit, I'm fucking powerful. I'm in this room because they need me. So then that was a opportunity for me to educate. I was like, just like you were saying, you can't just throw car loans at us. Like, are you in our community? Are you at the table with us having dinner? Like, are you buying plates for my plate sale for my tia because she just died and we don't have life insurance? Like, just things like just showing up for us. So, and I've had very many moments with other huge brands that have literally, they don't have a hold of the Hispanic market, but they really understand how powerful it is. So I think that people like us in place are very important. And like you said, it's up to us to lead the way.
Okay, I'll start briefly on this. So community capital for me is like all of the resources that we have to make the change that we want to see in the world. So when I wanted to start to build the Billy app, that came as a result of the community that we're working with, saying like, we know the importance of teaching Spanish to our children, but all of the resources that we have are translations or they're stereotypical understandings of our community. And so we started to create our own stories and nobody wanted to give us money to do it. So we had to get really creative on how to do this and came up with community authored stories and changing the way that we went about it, where we worked with local storytellers because we're storytelling people and having them retain the rights to their stories as well, which is like, you don't see that in publishing at all. So we do pay them to develop the stories, to illustrate the stories, and they can take that wherever they want. They can publish it themselves, self-publishing. They can take it somewhere else and have it published there. So I think that opportunity of the pinch of us, like not having external resources to do what we wanted to do, helped us to get creative, to think about what do we have and how do we reach our goal. I sometimes think about the Montgomery bus boycott, where we're thinking about resources in new ways. Like they didn't have money in that situation to have some type of like big sponsored event, but they're like, what resources do we have? We have our feet. So we have this car here and that car there that can carpool us. So we're going to use our community resources to make big, powerful, systemic change. And we have a lot of resources as a community where we can own our own stuff. We can make our own change and we can be a part of that.
You know, when I think about community capital, I think about what the power of my dollar has the ability to do. And so for a long time, I really thought about the arts and I really thought about how do I positively create my own opportunities to support artists and creative people. And I thought about, well, where can I put like my $1, right? And so for me, I really started to shift a lot of focus to supporting Latin artists. But what I realized once I started like putting my money into it, whether it was like collecting art from an artist or supporting a young fashion designer, was that there was a power in my capital in terms of connections and relationships. So I really shifted a lot of my focus into helping artists connect with resources, whether it was a relationship or a patron of the arts or an introduction to a curator, or a connection for a fashion designer to an editor, because I felt like there was so much value in the power of making that connection. Now, my parents being, immigrants, when they came to this country, they focused on working hard so they could put me through school and give me the access. But what you realize is when you're in the arts, is that a lot of these kids grew up with access their entire lives. They grew up with rich parents. They grew up with connections. They grew up with the ability to walk into a room and be able to connect with the thing that they want access to. I didn't have that. So I had to really rely on my people skills, and I had to really rely on connecting with people. And so now I really feel like when I think about community capital, it's, if you don't have a dollar, do you have a connection, or do you have an introduction? I feel like this goes a long way for Latinos, because sometimes we haven't thought about connecting with like a mentor, or even having a mentor, the idea of one, or having someone that is in that industry who is Latino, who has forged a path. And so I am really big on this. Now, the other side of it is that when it comes to this like community capital, I also feel like Latinos have a long way to go. And I really think about when George Floyd was killed, and when Black America said our dollar is super powerful, we are going to invest it in Black-owned brands and products and companies. And I think that Latinos often, we are like left to like fend for ourselves and like just survive and get through, or like be one of one, that sometimes we forget that the power of our dollar as like a community is so powerful. And so I really think that when we're thinking about like supporting, whether it's like fashion brands or artists or even music, the dollar goes a long way, and our investment can be made that way. And I think that slowly but surely, I think we're all holding each other accountable to making sure that we put our dollar in our own community, and we really look at like, is there a Latin owned brand in the beauty space that I could support? And I think when you think that way, it really also starts to like make your experience as a consumer feel more connected to the brand, and it feels authentic, and you also feel like you've kind of fulfilled a bit of your responsibility. So I think we have a long way to go, but I feel like when we do it, I always say like, it's not just about putting your money into it, but also like, can you be a resource in some way, shape, or form outside of like financial support?
Yeah, in terms of how I define community capital, to me, it's the strength that is inherent in communities long before the institutions decide, oh yeah, let me look over there. Like it is there, right? It's palpable. You see it, you feel it. It's the Thea who can connect you to the job openings and knows where they're happening. It's like, it's the church that helps you figure out how am I going to find the resources I need for my kids. Like it is there, right? And it's I think we as a community also need to make sure we don't glamorize the white definition of community, and make sure we realize the inherent strength in our own definition of community, because we've had it, and we will always have it. It's just how we operate is who we are. We come from communities that understand servant leadership, and that means you think about the collective before you think about the individual. There's strength in that. That's not a problem. So when I think about that in terms of work, it's really about, again, like I said, like policy is just things that are written on the paper, but it succeeds when community actually trusts it, right? So when you think about community capital, it's not just what is this great thing that you're offering, how will they receive it? How will they sustain it long after the people who authored it or built it or designed it are gone? Like how sustainable is it? And when you have that, it actually becomes capital, because you're like, just like money, right? It needs to last beyond you. So community capital is one and the same. And we actually have that. Our communities, they may not look like what white people define as wealthy and healthy, but when you dig in there and you find out who your comadre is, who your neighbor is, and how they help and help others survive, like there is power in that. And being able to look at that as an example of how do I know if I'm doing good enough, not just how does my bank account say if I'm doing good enough, or how does my degree say if I'm doing good. Like the way your community sees you is just as important and just as valuable in terms of capital.
We measure our success and our value on the bank account because that's how our culture has told us to, but we are so powerful with just our own community of resources. So really quick question. Do you think that we don't trust, because the Black community unites so fast. And like you said, they're real quick to back a brand and do a march and change things and this and that, get a president elected. But what do you feel like we don't trust each other? Like, what do you think the issues are that we can't unite to create this massive community power that we know is already there? The numbers economically aren't lying. something.
I also I hear you, and we are not a mono. We don't all come from one country. We don't all come from a country outside of the U.S. So I do think that there is we have to realize it is a big group with different lived experiences, right? So I do want to give credit to the amazing Chicano activists and organizers, Latino activists and organizers, immigrant activists and organizers, LGBTQ, Latino identifying activists and organizers who are doing that work. And while, yes, it is easy to say well, why don't we have enough? Let's also say, well, what did I do to help them, right? I do think we have it in us, and I do think we've heard this. I grew up hearing it since the 80s, this Latino sleeping giant. And yes, we do have to figure out how do we harness it. But I do think it's possible, and I do think rather than focusing on what have we not done yet, Bessie was saying she got here, she couldn't find community, she built it. So rather than saying this is broken, let's say what do I need to do so my kids don't have to experience, and we can build something different together.
I love that, Chim. I love that shift in perspective. I needed that. You describe bilingualism as resistance and joy. How does language shape identity, power, and opportunity for our community?
Yeah. So I would say language is identity, power, and opportunity. The founding fathers of the U.S. knew that even before the founding of the U.S., I think people in power know the power of language. The U.S. has a long history of linguistic oppression. So, Native American boarding schools, the first thing that they attacked was language, because they know language connects you to culture and community. When you have culture and community, you have power. So do we want to disempower people? Let's start with their language to cut that off. We had that with the folks that were enslaved and brought from Africa. Their language was banned. They could not use that. And that is just a long history. My parents were banned from speaking Spanish in school. And so it's really important to know that this is not a personal fault. I used to blame my parents when I got older and was like, oh man, why didn't you teach me Spanish? It would have been so much easier. And I shifted that perspective of whatever they passed on to me was a miracle, was an act of resistance, because it is so hard to do that in this country. And so that's really important to know that, and to start with that, and to start with that perspectives of language as resistance, language as power, language as community. A lot of our work is around preserving connection to language, healing those generational language wounds, and ensuring that our kids grow up bilingual, because it's something that is known how to be done. It's not a very difficult thing to have bilingualism. A lot of the world is multilingual, bilingual, but in the US it's very difficult. 33% of children enter into our public schools speaking a language other than English, and about 10 or 15% of our graduates are multilingual by the time they go through our US public school system. So there's a subtractive process there that we need to fight against. The other thing that I want to note, though, is that language cannot be a gatekeeper. So if somebody is in our community and they don't speak the language of that community, that doesn't mean they don't belong, right? So if somebody is Latina and doesn't speak Spanish, we can't say you're not Latina enough, you don't belong, because that is us reinforcing that linguistic oppression and gatekeeping access to community and to power. So that's really important that we can hold those two truths together at the same time. Yes.
You've built creative communities from Mexico City to Sao Paulo to the US. How do you see creativity functioning as a form of economic mobility for Latinas?
Well, when I think about this opportunity, I think it kind of goes back to my original comment of the United States becoming more Latino. So any brand that is trying to sell any product is going to have to know how to speak to Latinos. And what we need is people in the rooms that can authentically speak on that consumer. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there's a lot of white people in corporate America going, how do we speak to Latinos? And so I think for me, my opportunity that I had was to go to Latin America, live in Mexico City, live in Sao Paulo, and understand that the Latin American perspective is really unique to the Latin American perspective in the US. But why it was important is because I think there's more of a bridge culturally and creatively that's being built. When you think about Mexico, for example, when you think about gastronomy, everyone wants to go to Mexico City to eat. Everyone is talking about some of the 50 best restaurants. I think I want to say like over 25% of them are from Latin America. But if you look at the first chef that won the Michelin star, when he won it, he was told that Mexican food wasn't pure enough to actually compete and get gastronomy on like a global stage. And now everyone's like, I associate the taco with gastronomy, right? Mole with gastronomy. And so I think that naturally what's shifted is that perspective and lens, because Latinos in America are demanding more access to services and goods that reflect their own values and their own culture. And so naturally you start to see this through like gastronomy and art and fashion. It's why everyone listens to Bad Bunny, right? Like there's a lot of connections to culture, but in that we are becoming more curious about that bridge of, you know, I'm Mexican, I grew up in Chicago, but what is it like to have that perspective of culture from Mexico? And is it different? And it is. And it's very beautifully rich in terms of the different connections, because growing up in America, you naturally have references that are very unique and different, right, than when you do in Latin America. So I think for me, there is an opportunity for Latin creatives to work for brands or to create their own brands and products, because we know that it's a massively underserved. I mean, how many times you like see a commercial like, this is not speaking to me. I know they want me to buy it, but this shit doesn't make sense. I don't want to buy it. They don't even know Latinos exist. And all these brands are going, well, what do we do, right? And I think one of the things that they're missing is actually like interrogating how to do it authentically and understanding that Latinos are not a monolith, which is something like you pointed out, and really realizing that the nuances and like those differences all come together through like common values and like through shared experiences and like cultural references that we all can kind of like understand, even if they're slightly different. But I do think that now as I like navigate like my own career, what I've kind of shifted to is saying, I've worked for all these brands. I've done so many projects for them. I've made them a lot of money, but now how do I actually start working with Latin entrepreneurs and creatives to help them with their own brands or create my own? So now my goal is to create a platform for discovery of Latin creativity across like the US and Latin America. So, you know, if you're curious about exploring Peru, like what do you need to check out? What do you need to experience it? But doing through the lens of like the local creatives and the people who have built culture there. Because I think one of the biggest opportunities for us being so close to, for example, Mexico, is opportunity to like really discover and connect. But if you go to Mexico City and you don't know anyone, it might be hard to meet someone. So actually creating a platform that allows you to go to an artist studio and meet them and see their process and learn about their work. And I think the reason why this is so important is because we have to, again, continue like not just like building that economic power, but also be able to then say, how do we build that cultural bridge? And I think that if we have the ability to do that, then I think our economic power not only like supports what's happening in the US, but also supports what's happening in Latin America, where creatives and artists get paid significantly less, especially women. And so I think that now, like, I've really thought about this focus and almost like a responsibility.
You've built a career transforming lived experience into policy influence. How do you decide which stories or truths need to be elevated to shift systems?
Yeah, it really is like, how do you take data, which can be very sterile and really not be very compelling, right? I can read a lot of different statistics and data and not really see myself in it, even though I may be very well represented, or I can read it and not care because it just doesn't resonate. So for me, it is, how do you turn data into storytelling, right? How do you get whether it's an elected official or an administrator, a school administrator, to really understand that the policy and the designs that they have, the systems that they have, whether they are doing good or doing harm. And actually saying, like, I'll be very, very candid. Like, we, as an organization, had an app that would track student absences, right? Great. You need to tend to tell the parents, hey, your kid has had this many absences. It impacts their reading. They would then get a letter. In some states, that letter could actually lead to those parents losing custody of their kids because you're not taking your kid to school. Now, you could have a good reason it's the bus was late and you got you had to make a decision between, do I go to work or do I take my kid to school, right? It could be like, our car broke down and we were stuck on there could be a variety of reasons that happen to people every day. But when you have a level of privilege and power, you don't think twice about, the bus was late, I just had to call my boss.
Oh, right.
And, I was fine. When you have a job where whether or not you show up determines whether or not you have a job tomorrow, like that can be catastrophic. If your car breaks down and you have to figure out how are we going to pull the money together to get it fixed because I can't go to work, like that can be catastrophic. And that doesn't make you a bad parent. It doesn't mean you didn't want your kid to go to school. So really like saying like, this app is actually hurting and making families feel unsafe and uncomfortable to show up. Let's talk about why you actually need that and how you can get to a different solution to make sure kids get to school on time. Maybe you need to actually be providing support services to these families so they don't have to make the decision between school and work. Like what could you offer? In some schools, they now offer laundry. They offer washing machines because people would have, there's basic things that when you get to a certain level of prestige, you forget. Some things are necessities that we take like for granted. Some people see them as luxuries they may never have. And when you think about that from a term of policy, is like, how can you make sure that the policy that has all good intentions, there's all good intention to make sure your kids go to school, but it doesn't inadvertently hurt the people you're trying to help, right? And really sitting with that and thinking through, if that doesn't work, then what do we need to do to design different so all people feel welcome? And so it was really, I think the initiatives that I've been really focused on is like, how do we take these numbers and actually put stories behind them? And how do we not minimize that as pobrecitos and actually think like, no, you just need to know your audience. Like, don't pobrecito anybody. They are actually surviving. They're a lot stronger than you because what would you do if your car broke down? You take the day off and like, oh, I'll figure it out later. Some people don't have that luxury. So how do we make sure that we're tending to those folks because they are phenomenal leaders because they figure out how to show up every day and they want the best for their kids. One of the things that we've done at TNTP, we just announced our new strategic plan and we rolled that all around the country. But it came out of a conversation. We have our first Black CEO. She started 4 years ago. And I was the chief of staff at the time, so working directly with her. And she and I were talking about, like, what do we want school to be about, right? And so everybody in ed's like, oh, you want to make sure you can pass K-12 and go on to college and have a career. Yes, but why? If you ask me, I've got a 23-year-old because I don't want them living in my house till they're 50, right? It's that basic. My mom wanted to say, get out of here, go get your own stuff, right? And so, but when you think about that, it's like you want them to have economic and social mobility. You want them to have the same reason so many of our families came across and said, this is why I'm here, is for them to do better than you. That's it at the ground level. So we have now shifted our perception to like, it's not just what we do at the K-12 spaces. What do we do at the K-12 space that the kid that we're working with today will actually be the 30-year-old who's sitting on this sofa tomorrow, right? What are we doing and where are we looking at what we've done wrong to make sure we don't continue doing harm, and really shifting the perception in the ed sector. Like, it's not just about what goes on in the classroom from 8 to 3. It's how are these kids ready for the world of tomorrow, which will be more technologically advanced. You'll be changing careers multiple times. So what are we actually doing for them to be thriving adults versus just kids in the classroom today? So really shifting for all the people who get to make decisions, shifting their mindset. It's not your third grade literacy skills that matter. Yes, they matter, but only if that third grader can then go on to be the CEO that sits in the seat that you're sitting in now, or can become the next elected official that we're talking to. That's when you know it's success, and it pushes you to think beyond a 30, 60, 90-day plan to a generational mentality that will actually uplift the country.
What legacy do you hope to leave for the next generation of cultural leaders? Whoever wants to start, no particular order.
I think that when I look at my own references for culture and for like examples of role models, it was my actual community, like my parents, my aunts, people in my family, because in like the arts, there wasn't many examples of the zeitgeist representing like Latinos. Right now, there's obviously like a lot more, especially in the arts, like I've said. But I think for me, I actually don't plan on having children. I'm a childless Latina. And so I'm not having children, so therefore my legacy will look a lot different. But for me, it really is coming down to like mentorship and leaving behind the next generation. So one of the things that I did when I was living in Mexico City was that I realized that Latina creatives, like, because there's a lot of different types of Latinas that are living in Mexico City right now. There's a lot of Venezuelans, a lot of Argentinian women, and obviously Mexican women living there, but they're getting paid significantly less, and also living in a country where at least, like, I think it's like 95% of women have experienced some sort of like sexual violence, whether it's verbal or physical. And because of that, there wasn't actually like a program that provided grants to young Latina creatives. So I created one, which allowed young Latina creatives to apply and not only get financial like sign off for a project up to, it was $5,000, which translated to pesos is a good amount of money, but also connections to people in their industry that could kind of support them. And so for me, just the impact of that program alone, like 3 years later, is helping them launch their own brands and businesses, which feels very fulfilling to me. I don't have children, but I felt like they were my children. And so I really think that the legacy I want to leave behind is that I was not only like a patron of the arts for Latin artists, but that I was an advocate, because I think that advocacy is like the most fulfilling thing one can do. And I think it's something that has a domino effect, and I've seen like the positive impact of it already. And I feel that there's like a lot of work to do in that space.
Beautiful. Beautiful legacy.
So when I think of legacy, I think of my third child, which is bilingual generation. My husband and I, we were like, are we going to have a third child? I think I already had one, which is this organization. And it came from the birth of my first child. I had, I think, up until that point, worked on reclaiming my language, becoming an educator, dedicating research, nonprofit leader around like culturally and linguistically responsive learning practices. Then when I had my son, I was the executive director of the Center on Culture, Race, and Equity at Bank Street College of Education. Very long name, but I was like, I'm gonna have the most bilingual, culturally in touch child there ever was. I'm ready for this. And then he came into the world and I was like broken open. He brought out all of the stuff I think that I had thought I'd been working on, but really suppressed. That comes to mind when I was in the home with him and trying to create a language-rich environment and narrating everything in Spanish. I was like, vamos a cambiar tu pañal, primero tenemos que quitar los pantalones, just talking to him, to try to have a language-rich environment. And then I would go out into the streets of Brooklyn and have him in his stroller, and I was mute. I was completely silent because I was afraid. I was afraid that somebody would hear me speaking Spanish and judge me, because maybe they thought I shouldn't be speaking Spanish, or judge me because I conjugated a verb incorrectly, or judge me because they heard an accent and think, what is she doing trying to teach her child Spanish when she's not 100% perfect at that? And I was just filled with shame. I think I was filled with the shame that I had for growing up as like a no sabo kid. I was filled with the shame that my parents had for only speaking Spanish and not speaking English in the classroom. I was filled with the shame of my grandmother, who like wasn't literate in either language. And I could feel that shame. And I was like, okay, here it is generationally. What am I going to pass on to my child? Am I going to pass on that shame, or am I going to pass on the liberation? So I had to make a very specific choice that I am going to speak to him no matter what comes out of my mouth in Spanish, to try to pass on that liberation and have a mindset that language is not about perfection. It's about connection. That language is about our community. That language is not a gatekeeping tool. And so that's the work that I did specifically as a mother that I know is so hard. I felt completely capable to do it with a doctorate from Harvard and all of this education, and yet it was so difficult. And I knew that we needed a community to do that, to support each other as Latinas, to do that healing on a personal level and also on a familial level with the generations that we're bringing up. So that's a legacy that I hope to leave both with my family, but with the larger community.
Beautiful.
For me, I think the legacy, and I think it's the reason we're all here, the reason like these events like this that Bessie's created are so important, is just to have a Latina leadership pipeline. Right. And I started with the story, like when I came into TNTP, there were 8 of us. And then I called that to question, but I also did the work behind it. Right. I authored the organization's first Latina recruitment retention plan. Right. Nice. How are we going to bring more people in? How are we going to keep them? How are they going to stay? And how are we going to evaluate that they're not just coming in at entry level? I came in as mid-level, but that they are at every level of the organization. So if there's a leadership pipeline top to bottom, and anybody who comes in can see someone who looks like them, either in a role they want or in a role they had, right? And really thinking through how do you make it sustainable? Because I think it's, and the beauty of that is, like, I'm now stepping down. I've been there 10 years. I'm going into a new role in next month where I'll be working directly, identifying folks to run for office. So if you're thinking about running for office, please talk to me. We're a national organization, new politics, and we're going to be looking for people to fill the halls of Congress that look more like us. But as I leave TNTP, I look back and I'm sending I started a Latina affinity group, right? So we could see each other and also not have to be on, right? We don't have to speak the corporate lingo. Like, we could just be with our gente and talk about, oh yeah, this project is crazy. Like, what do I do? I don't want to ask them because I don't want them to know I don't know this, but tell me, how do I do this, right? How do I navigate this organization? So you can be more vulnerable in space with your family, with your gente, and making sure that we had that space. So as I was telling them, hey, I'm leaving, I realized how big our roster had grown from 8 to there's 73 of us now across the organization, across the country, at all levels, from chief to VP to partner to director, at all levels. So it was really fulfilling. And the emails I've gotten from them about what it meant as they heard about the news and how they've seen themselves in the organization as a place they can grow. That to me was what I wanted to leave. And that's the legacy I think that we all want to leave. And I also want us to, as we think about that legacy, one, not be gatekeepers, right? Don't ever be happy that you're the only one. That's a problem. That is always a problem when you're the only one. And you should never sit like, how cool, I'm the only Latina here. No, fix that. Always fix that. Yes. But 2, don't see what you're coming in with as a deficit. I think someone said it in the panel earlier, it was Angelica, wear the red lipstick, wear the big hoops, wear the colors, you own you, right? Because they know your value. They know our purchasing power. They know our influence. They know our intellect, that we can navigate multiple languages, multiple communities, and do it with ease because it's authentically who we are. So come in knowing, I hope the legacy is that women, Latino women here, that we don't ever shrink for anybody. Right? We don't do it at home, so why would we do it in a professional space? Come in owning who you are and let that be your legacy.
I am your host, Bessie Martinez, and I am so grateful that you are here with us today because you are in for a treat. In March, for the last 3 years, during a event that is hosted here in the Austin area called South by Southwest, we have been hosting our own unofficial event called House of Chingonas. And so today, we are going to be bringing you one of those panel sessions for you to be able to watch or listen, depending on where you prefer, to be able to catch your content. And you'll be able to see exactly what kind of conversations Latinas are having during South by Southwest. If you've never come to South by Southwest, it is an amazing event to attend to. However, there is still room for growth when it comes to the Latino representation during festivals like this. That is why my foundation, the Latina Foundation, is so excited every year to be able to host this, as many of other events throughout the entire year, but this one particularly because it brings people from all walks of life, from all parts of this country, to sit down, have a conversation. So this year it was Nuestra Casa es tu Casa. And so we're so excited to be able to bring you this episode with this particular topic. So go ahead, sit down, grab your cafecito, grab your té, grab your comadres, and listen into the conversations that Latinas are having today. We hope you enjoy it.
I'll wrap up with what I feel like I'm leaving in my legacy behind on the creative end. Because I produce content, I'm lucky enough to have tons of videos that will live on the interwebs, hopefully forever. And I feel like that would be my legacy that I get to leave behind, is the stories that I told and the laughs that I brought into the world. Because one of my goals in life is to bring joy in times of sorrow and to just shed light, but like bring positivity and laughter while we're going through a lot of things, especially for people who suffer from depression and anxiety, to shed that hope. So that's the legacy that I pour into these videos. I want to hopefully leave behind long after. They'll be like, there was a crazy loca named Sam, and she was a chingona from San Antonio. She had these crazy videos. Anyways, well, thank you, ladies, so much for showing up today at the House of Chingonas for this panel. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause, please.